I got an idea. What if we made a grilled cheese sandwich, but in reverse? Okay, so here's how I approached this. Off the top of my head, I could have done one of two things. I could have gone with the obvious route, which was to make a grilled cheese sandwich and then crusted it with some sort of cheese. Alternatively, I could have taken a singular slice of bread and then coated that with cheese. Now, my concern with the first solution is that it may end up being a bit too oily, a bit too heavy, and all around not that great to eat. While this would be the simplest solution, I still wanted a sandwich that I would want to eat. As for the second solution, now I'm not too sure if I can consider it a sandwich if there's only one slice of bread and that slice of bread isn't exactly sandwiching anything else. Also, I would prefer a crispier exterior, and when it comes to grilled cheese sandwiches, well, the insides tend to be a bit softer, a bit chewier, and having something crispy on the outside may give us a more interesting final product. After a short amount of thinking this over, I figured that there wouldn't be anything overly special about having liquidy, chewy cheese on the outside of a slice of bread, and it would honestly be quite a pain to eat. I mean, sure, it could be different, but why not just buy mozzarella sticks, right? So I think the first step forward is figuring out the cheese crust. Now, Low Key Burritos uses a cheddar jack, which is basically a mix of, well, cheddar and Monterey Jack. However, I felt that it was worth testing and tasting the cheeses on their own, so I knew what I was working with. Unfortunately, I could only find Colby Jack, not to be confused with the cold freezing Jack in Titanic. Jack. So that's basically what I used. Before being cooked, the cheddar had a sharp, slightly tangy and astringent flavor. It's an aged cheddar, so that's no surprise. If you've eaten cheddar that isn't sliced Cheesedale cheese, then you should be familiar with the flavor. It was a bit creamier than I initially expected though. It was a little rubbery, but overall still pretty pleasant. As for the Colby Jack, it was similar to the cheddar. It was sharp, astringent, but not as milky and a bit drier. This was a bit surprising, as the cheese had light whitish spots which I assumed would translate to a creamier cheese. However, it was distinctively different as it had a sort of mild funk to it. I grated both cheeses and cooked them over high heat while sort of spreading out the oil that was released. I let them cook until they turned a bit darker and could be removed from the pot. I would have used a larger non-stick pan, but the one I have has a ceramic base which doesn't work with the induction stoves. After being cooked, the Colby Jack turned into a brittle, crispy tweel of cheesy goodness. Its flavor changed drastically, becoming much deeper and sharper. You get more of a slightly roasted flavor that wafts and coats your mouth. The mild funk was definitely still present, which was a nice touch. If you've ever had lasagna, you know just how good charred cheese can be. Just imagine the crispy edges of the pasta pie that everyone loves. As for the cheddar, it became a lot sharper and saltier. It had more of a neutral flavor and definitely was not as strong as the Colby Jack. The initial creaminess that it had was gone, and the tweel was a lot less brittle and a bit chewier than the Colby. Frying off a 50-50 mixture of the two sort of gave me the best of both worlds. The flavor was great and it wasn't too brittle. So that's basically the results of my experiments and my observations for today, and I think I'm quite happy with the results. Now it's getting pretty late, so I will continue this tomorrow, where I will attempt to make the sandwich and hopefully be able to wrap the sort of cheese crust and get it to stick to the bread. So yeah, let's cut to tomorrow.
The next day.
So now that I more or less know what I'm working with, all that's left is to make the actual sandwich. For the filling, I chose to go with a mixture of Edam, Gouda and Manchego. I chose these because they were flavorful enough on their own and were able to provide a nice amount of stretch. Sure, I could have gone with mozzarella, but regular mozzarella doesn't come in slices and tends to be a bit flavorless. As for buffalo mozzarella, well, it's just a bit too wet even if you dry it, and at the heats that I'm cooking at, it just won't end up melting too nicely. That being said, I would have preferred using Swiss cheese over Edam, but sadly that was out of stock. As for the bread, well, I decided to go with some good old brioche. Instead of buttering and grilling the bread like I normally would if I was making a regular grilled cheese sandwich, I chose to lightly toast the bread on both sides before placing the cheese in the middle and then melting it. I then melted the grated cheese in my cast iron pot, let it melt and cook out until it formed a tweel, placed in the freshly toasted sandwich, and attempted to fold the cheese over. One issue that I faced was that the walls of the pot were just a bit too high to easily maneuver and fold the sandwich. But overall, despite its looks, I think this was a decent first try. The grated cheese formed a nice crispy crust that stuck to the bread for the most part, and the sliced cheeses were nice and melty in the middle. I was also pretty happy with the flavor. So with that tiny success, I decided to make another, but do it the proper way. For that, I needed to use a non-stick pan with the proper dimensions and with a much lower wall. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with my induction stove because it has a ceramic bottom, and due to spatial constraints, I can't actually film my gas stovetop because there's no space. So because of this, all I can provide you is some B-roll of the glorious final product with all its cheesy goodness. And there you have it, how I made a cheese-crusted grilled cheese sandwich. I will say that I'm pretty pleased with the results. It's crispy on the outside, gooey and stringy in the center, and packed with cheesy goodness. You could possibly add a layer of sun-dried tomatoes or tomato pesto if you wanted a bit more contrast in flavor, or alternatively, you could just serve the sandwich with a nice wholesome big bowl of tomato soup. Either way, you're in for a pretty good time. But that's all for today. If you enjoyed the video or learned something new, hit that like button, share the video with all your friends and family, and do consider subscribing if you haven't already. Also, let me know in the comments down below what other dishes you'd like to see, what other products you'd like me to review, or what other recipes you would like to learn. Also, you could just say hello in the comments because it helps with the YouTube algorithm. But for now, I'll say thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next video.